looked at Fox and said about relevant. In October of 1996, Fox News was launched in the US. Fox News. Their slogan was Fox News, fair and balanced. I like you guys. They were not trying to be funny. They were trying to brand themselves as an alternative to what they saw as the mainstream liberal media. A few years later, they had a new slogan. Fox News, we report, you decide. Bill O'Reilly, God rest his soul, wherever he is now, had his own version of this slogan. He called his show the No Spin Zone. We laugh at these slogans now for obvious reasons. Fox News calling themselves fair and balanced is like me calling myself straight and emotionally stable. It's a nice idea, but we know it's not true. Are you clapping for me not being emotionally stable? Thanks, guys. But the truth is, we take the ideas behind those slogans very seriously in America. Adolph Ochs, the founding publisher of the modern New York Times, once wrote that a responsible newspaper must present all sides of a controversial issue and let readers decide the truth. Fox News and the New York Times could not be more different as news organizations, but they're both hinting at the same core American ideal, that good journalism is neutral. It's impartial. It doesn't try to tell you what to think, who to believe, certainly not who to vote for. It just presents you with the debate and lets you figure it out. That ideal is deeply rooted in Americans' anxieties about bias. We've been trained as a culture to view bias on the parts of journalists as disqualifying. If a reporter has a personal feeling about the story they're covering, especially about politics, we think that they can't be trusted to tell us the truth. And so our entire media ecosystem has been built around trying to minimize the risk of bias by presenting audiences with every side of every possible controversy. There's a bill being debated in Congress, get a quote from a Democrat, from a Republican, let the audience figure it out. No bias. A politician says that immigrants are rapists and criminals, find someone who agrees, someone who doesn't, fight it out. No bias. Trump says something truly bonkers during a campaign speech, assemble an 8-person panel on prime time to argue about it for an hour. You guys seen these CNN panels? There are 8 people on the screen right now. Where are you supposed to look? It's like watching a Renaissance painting. NYU journalism professor Jay Rosen calls this approach to journalism the view from nowhere. In our desire to avoid being accused of bias, journalists have essentially become glorified stenographers, playing referee while activists and pundits and politicians fight it out. And maybe you're okay with this. After all, there's something very American about this approach to journalism, right? We don't want some East Coast Ivy League reporter telling us what to think. Let them fight, and we'll just, I don't know why I'm doing Foghorn Leghorn for this voice, but let them fight, and we'll decide who wins, right? Hunger Games. As a college-educated former debate nerd, I like to think of myself this way too. Just show me both sides, and I will tell you what the truth is. The problem is, this is not really how our brains work. For one, we tend to mentally check out when we're exposed to news coverage like this. If you've ever actually tried to watch one of these CNN segments, you know that you might start feeling pretty sure that you know what they're talking about. And after 10 minutes of them screaming, you have no idea what's going on anymore. A 2011 study by Ohio State University ran this cool experiment where they gave readers an article about a hypothetical bill in Congress. The article just included both parties' positions about the bill, but didn't try to resolve which one was right. And the study found that people who read that article ended up feeling less confident that they could figure out the truth about the bill on their own. It's not hard to imagine why. Most of us are not political scientists, or science scientists, obviously. We think that when someone is quoted in a newspaper or asked to be on TV, it's because they know something that we don't, that they're experts, or at least that they are somewhat credible. So when you see 2 or 8 people who are experts arguing about something that you don't know a lot about, your tendency is to assume that they're all kind of right, and all kind of wrong. That the truth must lie somewhere in the middle of this fight. Or worse, that the truth is unknowable. There is no right or wrong answer. It's really just a matter of opinion. After all, if the trained professional journalists can't figure out what's truth and what's not truth, how are we supposed to? The second problem is that we tend to remember and believe what we hear repeated. The more we hear a claim, the more likely we are to remember it as true, even if we've never seen evidence to prove it's true. If every time you turned on the TV, you saw a serious debate about whether Carlos Maza runs an underground fight club, after a while, a tiny part of you would think, does he run a fight club? I can't believe they let me use this slide. This is going to be on the internet forever, so I'm thrilled to be here. It's because after a while, your brain would start to associate the idea of Carlos Maza with Fight Club. If every time you turned on the TV, you saw a debate about whether vaccines cause autism, the same thing would happen. Your brain would start associating vaccines with autism. Even me using that example in this speech makes you a little bit more likely to make that mistake. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to make a point here. The scary thing is, this happens even if a false claim is being debunked. A bunch of research has been done about whether fact-checking, repeated exposure to corrections, can stop someone from misremembering bad information. And the answer, overwhelmingly, is in part because fact-checking requires you to first restate the lie you're trying to debunk. And restating it strengthens it in the audience's mind. If every time you turn on the TV, you saw a chyron that said, Carlos Maza does not run a fight club, he does not run a fight club, you'd still be more likely to think of it as true than if you were never exposed to that debate at all. I imagine most people here are not anti-vaxxers, but if I ask you what's the first word that comes to your head when you hear vaccine, I bet for a lot of you, it's autism now. I've used this example as a joke, but in real life this is really scary. A recent piece of journalism in The Verge looked at Facebook content moderators, people whose job it was to hunt down and delete conspiracy theories on Facebook. And they found that a huge number of them ended up believing those conspiracy theories over time. Anti-vaxxer stuff, flat earther stuff, 9/11 stuff. It wasn't that they had uncovered some nugget of information that we don't have access to. It was that even they, people who are trained to not fall for it, could not resist the power of repeated exposure. We report, you decide, fundamentally misunderstands how humans decide when we're exposed to a lot of bad information. And what's scarier is how easily this approach to journalism can get hijacked by bad actors. Conspiracy theorists, demagogues, and corporate shills who know that all they have to do to convince the public of a big lie is get them used to it. Get it on TV over and over again. The most obvious example of this has been the debate over climate change. Fossil fuel companies have spent years convincing journalists that climate change is just another one of those issues with two sides to it. That climate scientists are actually liberal activists in disguise, and that not including the voices of climate deniers is a kind of bias. That probably sounds ridiculous to us, but it's been incredibly effective at influencing news networks, who've included climate deniers in nearly every freaking debate about climate change over the past 10 years. The goal of this strategy isn't to win these debates. Fossil fuel companies know they can't win the debate about climate change. Most of the deniers they put on TV aren't even cited. This guy is a former weatherman. The point of this strategy is to make the debate messy. To make it so confusing and frustrating that people at home stop paying attention. They think, they're both probably lying. Or worse, they default to whatever their political party tells them to believe about this issue. You see a bunch of fringe groups using this same exact strategy now. Anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, lunatics on YouTube, they all make the same exact demand. Debate me. What are you so afraid of? Put me on your show. They recognize that as soon as the referee lets them play, as soon as a journalist invites them to say whatever they want to say to millions of people on a national audience, they've won. And the frustrating thing is, we all implicitly know how to deal with bad actors like this. If every time you ask me to hang out with your friends, I told your friends, oh yeah, I can bench press 1,000 pounds and I'm secretly dating Jake Gyllenhaal, you wouldn't try to fact check me. You wouldn't assemble an 8-person panel to debate about it on TV. You'd stop inviting me to hang out. You would tell your friends Carlos is a liar. Don't take anything he says seriously. You would recognize rightly that even engaging in what I was saying would be rewarding bad behavior, incentivizing me to tell you more lies. And you'd be right. But that's a judgment call that most news networks are terrified to make. The idea of blacklisting an entire political position, a political party, of calling someone a liar, is anathema to news networks that are terrified of being accused of bias, which is how you end up with major news segments about whether millions of people voted illegally in the last election. I love/hate this picture because the two people who are telling the truth, who are winning this debate, and who are technically correct, are miserable. Look at them. They're having the worst day. The woman who is lying, who is objectively losing this debate in terms of facts, is thrilled to be on TV because she knows that no matter what happens in this segment, 1 million people have heard her say that people voted illegally in the last election. She already won. That's the easy part of my talk. It's actually kind of easy to say that journalism should be about facts and neutrality gets in the way of facts. I don't know why I'm doing a voice because that's just my voice, that's my argument. That's an easy argument. But journalism is not just about facts. Journalism is about justice. It's about morality. It's about right and wrong, good and evil. When was the last time you turned on the TV and saw a debate about whether interracial marriage should be allowed? When was the last time you opened a newspaper and saw an article weighing the pros and cons of putting gay people in prison? It's not like there's no debate about these things. About 20% of Americans still think interracial marriage is wrong. A shocking number of states still have unconstitutional anti-sodomy laws on the books. The reason you don't see these debates is because at some point, news networks decided it was unethical to even talk about this anymore. That having the debate, inviting the audience to decide about these things, violated some core principle of good journalism. That is the right call, but it's a call that has nothing to do with facts or objectivity. It has everything to do with bias, with judgment, with the journalist's own sense of right and wrong, good and evil. And journalists make calls like this all the time. If you're writing a piece about a baker who refused to serve a gay couple, is your headline about the baker's religious beliefs or the couple's humiliation? If you're doing a piece about a black victim of police brutality, is the image you use of the victim's mugshot or their high school yearbook photo? If you're writing a piece about campus sexual assault, is the last line in your article about the victim's trauma or the accuser's reputation? You might have an answer to these questions. I think I do too. But the point is that those answers have nothing to do with facts. They have to do with our own internal judgments about right and wrong. And there is no neutral way to answer those questions. In 2009, NPR's ombudsman defended the outlet's decision to not use the word torture to describe waterboarding, arguing that the word torture was loaded with social and political implications, and that NPR's job was to present their listeners with all perspectives. This January, NBC sent a memo to its reporters asking them to not use the word racist to describe Steve King's white nationalist comments, suggesting that instead they use phrases like what many are calling racist. Every single night in this country, we debate the humanity of trans people and immigrants and Muslims on national news networks and on the front pages of major newspapers. Every single day. You can call that journalism a lot of things. You cannot call it neutral. Refusing to name evil for what it is not a neutral act. Treating xenophobia or transphobia or Islamophobia as just one side of a political debate is not a neutral act. It's a choice that actively aids those who want to make evil and bigotry seem normal. It signals to the audience that reasonable people can disagree about this stuff, and by extension, that evil and bigotry are reasonable positions to hold. Journalists are gatekeepers. We help decide what is and isn't worthy of public debate, what stories are and are not worthy of being told to a national audience. There's no way to do that neutrally. no matter how clear or objective your lens is, you still have to decide where you want to point your camera. And that means answering big, messy questions about power, justice, good and evil, what actually matters, and maybe most importantly, what kind of a world do we want to live in? It also means taking responsibilities for your answers to those questions, admitting that your newsroom has a point of view, and being able to defend it. And that's scary. Nobody wants to become the next Fox News, and for good reason. But it's worth remembering that neutrality in the face of evil and bullshit is its own kind of bias. It's a choice to give up on trying to make sense of the world, to differentiate between right and wrong, good and evil. And it's a choice that leaves audiences at home to fend for themselves, at a time when demagogues and hate mongers are most eager to fill the void we leave behind. Thank you.